for your service at a really crucial and difficult time in our history. Thank you for that. I want to talk about Iran and where we stand at the moment. I first want to follow up on Mr. Smith's comments from earlier. I'm grateful for the way that you speak up about the Americans who are being held, and I just would implore you to continue to turn up the pressure. In my case specifically with respect to my constituent Robert Levinson, one of two things it seems are going to happen over the coming months. Either negotiations will succeed and there'll be some agreement on the nuclear issue, or we're going to have to figure out how to deal with Iran's other despicable behavior, or negotiations fall apart. Either way, pressure will significantly decrease on Iran to cooperate. In the case of Mr. Levinson, on March 9th, Mr. Secretary, Bob Levinson will mark his family will mark the 8th anniversary of his disappearance. You'll meet your Iranian counterparts many times between now and then, and now in the end of March. And I thank you for raising it, and I implore you to continue to do so. Now, with respect to where we stand, you asked us not to prejudge, and I don't think that we need to prejudge, but I think it's only fair to be able to comment on reports, media reports about where this may be headed, particularly since often, let's be honest, a lot of the reports include information that comes from the administration. So given that, just a couple of points. On enrichment, you had said earlier that you came and sat before our committee as others suggested the JPOA might not work. But also, if I recall at that hearing, with respect to enrichment, in the JPOA, it referred to a mutually agreed upon level of enrichment, which you suggested might well be 0. It's not just actions taken in prior administrations. The UN 7 times in security resolutions suggested that there would be no enrichment. So the frustration that some have when you look at a deal that may ultimately include as many as 6,000 or 7,000 centrifuges is trying to understand why Iran would need that many, since currently there is one nuclear reactor that's fueled by Russian fuel. They can't use any of the uranium they're enriching to fuel that reactor. There's just some concern about how we've gotten to that point. That's number one. Number two, when you talk about Iranian compliance with the JPOA, you said that the IAEA has certified that they've complied in every way, but Deputy Secretary Blinken testified just last month that there were situations that we believe were violations of the JPOA, and I'd like to know what those were and what it says about Iranian intentions for a long-term agreement if they're already violating those terms. Next, on the issue of PMD, also the IAEA there published 12 sets of questions about Iran's past work, and Iran has only partially tackled one of those issues. Again, as we look toward a potential agreement, how can we be assured that Iran will comply with it if they're not willing to come clean on what they've done in the past? I'd ask if you can confirm that any deal can only be agreed upon if it provides for any time, anywhere inspections. And finally, for me and for a lot of us here, most importantly, the role of Congress. You had said yesterday on the Senate that, of course, we'll have a chance to review it and we'll have a vote because a vote will be necessary to ultimately terminate sanctions. That's clear to us. I appreciate your saying it. If you could speak to Congress's role going forward and answer also whether you believe we should start talking now, whether there's a role for Congress to play in talking about what would happen in the event there is a deal and in the event that Iran violates the terms of that deal. Would it be helpful for Congress to work with the administration to lay out specifically what the ramifications would be in that instance?
Well, Congressman, first of all, I want to impress on everybody that I find very helpful, and I think the administration finds very helpful, the discussions with you, whether here or in classified session. And we're not at all suggesting that by raising a question or making suggestions, as you've just had, about one, potential complication or, suspension to negotiate these other things. They're all fair questions, and they help us. We factor that in, and it helps us in terms of thinking about, every aspect of the negotiation. That's different from, actually condemning the deal and sort of turning off and saying there's no way this is going to work, or it's a bad deal, or you're about to make a bad deal, when you don't really have all of the components of the deal in front of you, and we don't even, because it's not yet resolved. So that's the distinction I'm trying to draw. But we welcome this kind of a question. And I would simply quickly say to you, the UN Security Council resolution, and I went back and reread it, in fact, in the middle of the negotiations this last few days, paragraph 37 of the 1929 resolution, in fact, has not been lived up to. It hasn't been met, and it's not relevant to what we are doing right now, to be honest with you, because it talked about suspension of enrichment. Didn't say they can't enrich. Talked about suspension, and then the negotiations would decide what is or isn't allowed, as long as it meets the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and so forth. So that's the negotiation we're in right now. Now, Wendy Sherman, in her discussion with you, I know did not raise any violations because there haven't been any violations. We have sanctioned individual companies during the course of this period of time with the interim agreement. We've actually imposed more sanctions. And we've sanctioned individuals, we've sanctioned companies, there's been an ongoing effort to hold the sanctions regime accountable. And the final thing I'd say to you is, Iran already operates light water reactors at Bushehr, fueled by the Russians, Russian design. And these reactors pose less of a risk for the potential of civilian power production than other types of reactors that are prohibited by the UN Security Council. So what they're doing now is not, in fact, a violation. And we've been clear in making, in defining that the purpose of the negotiations we're in now with Iran is to ensure that their nuclear program is exclusively for civilian purposes. That's the key here. They could have a civilian peaceful program. So when you get into the numbers of centrifuges and this and that, if you have a civilian power plant that's producing power legitimately and not a threat to proliferation, you could have as many as 190,000 or more centrifuges. And there are millions of centrifuges involved ultimately in power plants that are producing power. So the key here is this a peaceful program, and are the measures in place capable of making sure you know it's peaceful? That's the standard we're trying to apply.
We go now to Judge Ted Poe of Texas, Chairman of the Terrorism and Non-Proliferation Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.